A man who looked like a monster from the movie Alien stood on the battlefield. In his hand was someone's head. Drones were flying behind and shooting into the distance. Demon King. The result of human hatred and arrogance that destroyed the old world. Holy Sword. A powerful weapon that has absorbed the deity of the old world and gives its owner strength comparable to the strength of the god himself. The various weapons from the sword to the pike glowed with different lights. A man in a black suit was reading a book near the fireplace. His face was covered with a huge magic cap. Until now, there are 5 known comings of the Demon King to our world. 5 times he threatened people's lives and the harmony of the whole world. To confront him, the fire raged wildly. The one who was able to master the holy sword appeared. A hero has appeared. Who pierced the Demon King with a sword and saved the world. A man in a black suit stood with a book near the fireplace and told all this to the audience. A blonde girl was sitting at the table, a brunette man was sitting opposite her, and another man in a blue jacket was watching all this. Suddenly, the man in the black suit hit the table with his fist and said loudly. But now the Demon King has appeared once again and has already occupied the territories of Gliss and Lance. The 2 men sat and listened to the story with smiles on their faces. He can launch an attack on the capital at any moment. The girl listened carefully to the narrator. The next moment, a man in a black suit adjusted his hat and a yellow dark eye glowed from behind the huge hat. The man continued the story. But the hero never revealed himself. After all the holy swords were lost during past battles. A question came from the table to the narrator. What can we do? Just wait for the end of humanity to come? Suddenly another man in a blue jacket with long hair and green eyes exclaimed. No. We can't let this happen. I will find a new holy sword. A guy in a green jacket drew attention to the man. But the man in the blue jacket continued. And I will become him, a new hero. And then, we will save this world. This is the goal of my life. I'm Mark Turquoise. Mark with 2 swords stood next to a man in a black robe. All the listeners and the narrator stood behind Mark. Everyone knows this hero, the adventurer of the turquoise Mark. A huge tree stood in the foreground, and behind it was a beautiful picturesque city. On that day, Mark had to accept the patronage of the supreme god Asilius. And together with his group he headed to the Temple of the Gods, located near the World Tree. The next moment, the turquoise Mark and the black-robed man stood opposite each other in fighting poses. Mark looked at the man with a surprised look. A man in a black robe was holding what looked like a priest censer. "Uriah," said a man in a black robe and directed his stream of magic at Mark. The right hand of the hero Mark, the sorcerer Maurice, suddenly betrayed him. The next moment, Mark dodged the attack of the sorcerer Maurice. Mark stood opposite the sorcerer Maurice, holding 2 swords in his hands. Mori turned out to be a powerful black magician. He killed his students, the warriors Emilia and Matteo. However, that's why he even killed Saint Mina. A girl with a blank dead look and blood from her mouth and nose. Suddenly, the sorcerer Maurice began using a magical attack on Mark again. I riot. Maurice raised his hand to Mark himself and tried to kill him. But the next moment, Mark stood in a defensive fighting pose, holding 2 swords in front of him. However, the attack of the sorcerer Maurice did not work, and Mark repelled the magical attack with his swords. Couldn't cope with the hero's awakened holy sword, Eyeless. And then another holy sword, Lucia. Mark suddenly widened his eyes and was surprised by something in front of him. Mark stood in a fighting pose after parrying the blow. Mark pierced the traitor sorcerer. The next moment, Mark, with a smile on his face, asked the sorcerer Maurice a question. This is how I plan to present it. What do you say? The sorcerer Maurice was wounded and held his wound with one hand and held his sword tightly with the other. Mark stood behind him and called his name again. Maurice? However, sorcerer Maurice did not want to give up so easily and tightly grabbed the blade that pierced him. Yes, screw you. It was you yourself, Mark, who killed everyone, wasn't it? Mark, with an open mouth and a surprised look, answered the sorcerer. Yes, that's why you will remain in history as a sorcerer, condemned by a hero for betraying his comrades. The next moment, Maurice stood opposite Mark and asked in surprise. What? Mark continued his sentence further. Tell me, Maurice, how many holy knights do you think there are in the world? In order to be the highest-ranking hero among them, I needed to sacrifice you. Maurice put his sword away and stood on the destroyed ground. Suddenly Maurice became angry with Mark for his statements and began to argue. Did you need all of us who accompanied you on your travels just for this? Mark walked away from Maurice and was surprised by his words. Maurice was shocked by his statements and asked Maurice again with surprise on his face. Only? The next moment, Mark raised his blade to the side and continued. Look. Having absorbed the divine power of Saint Mina, Eyeless turned into a holy sword. Raising his sword to his head, Mark continued. And the holy sword Lucia will receive your black magic and become a magical sword. And I will get both swords. Mark's look was murderous after these words. And I will become the strongest of heroes. Mark stabbed Maurice again. Maurice grabbed his sword. Ugh. Since when did you become like this? The next moment, Mark, with one movement of his sword, took off Maurice's sorcerer's hat. And behind the hat there was a not very neat man, more like an orc. Marcus said with an ominous face, throwing his hair a little to one side and holding his sword tightly. From the very beginning. Otherwise, I would have taken someone like you as a comrade, don't you think? Sorcerer Maurice with a tired, beaten look and blood on his lip. His look no longer gave any hope of survival, and in his tired voice he asked Mark. What about Mina? Mark stood not far from Maurice. Behind him were fragments of earth from the battle with Maurice. The same. She had divine power, but was of low birth. What kind of friend is she to me? We all loved you, Mark. They respected you. Maurice exclaimed heartfelt words to Mark. But Mark at that moment had already pressed Maurice against a wall with his sword and kept him motionless. However, with tears in his eyes and a broken face, Maurice continued to tear at Mark's soul. We are here for you. We lived only for you. You couldn't tell from Mark's face that he sympathized with Maurice. He was just a little surprised, but his gaze remained just as cold. If so, will you die for me? Mark had a crazy smile on his face. His eyes rolled back at the words Maurice said earlier. The next moment Mark exclaimed. Die already, I don't have time to bother with you. Greater things await me. However, in the next moment, Mark was surprised by something. There was shock on his face. Magic power increasing? Mark thought to himself. The next moment, a circle of blood formed around the sorcerer Maurice, more like a ritual. Mark was completely shocked by what he saw, his eyes widened, and his mouth could not close in surprise. Suddenly, the sorcerer Maurice pushed Mark away and jumped down with the sword in his chest. Maurice, what are you doing? Mark exclaimed. Around them the ground was cracking, and huge stones were flying in different directions. Maurice was flying in the air and screaming. I was saving this for the battle with the Demon King. Suddenly Maurice spoke. Forbidden magic. Maurice was in the air when suddenly a huge scary skeleton began to crawl out of the ground. On top of him was a circle of blood, which summoned him. The next moment Maurice spoke. Removing restrictions on the source of magic, I give my life to it. The skeleton began to fill with blood. Suddenly Mark realized the whole picture of what was happening in front of him, and with a crazy look, in a panic, began to shout to Maurice. Maurice, stop. Nothing stopped Maurice, and he was near the skeleton, which was already created up to the ribs. The entire room was crumbling and breaking from the flow of magic from the epicenter of the event. Mark continued to scream madly, and Maurice said his last words with a sad face. Mark. Mine. Dark. Cold. Very cold. Somewhere in my memories these words flew. In the next moment, the farmer stood and worked on his farm. He had a pitchfork in his hands and in front of him was a stack of hay. Behind him stood a pig. In my memories. The farmer wiped his right eye and looked into the distance. The city was empty. The buildings looked more like small chicken coops. And behind the chicken coops stood a huge mansion. The narrow street only divided into two directions, up or down. In the next moment, someone was holding the severed head of a chicken tightly in his hand. Blood flowed from her neck in a huge stream. This blood dripped onto our farmer's head. One of the black silhouettes was holding this chicken, and behind him there were several more of the same silhouettes, laughing at this situation. Holding your eye. The farmer was very upset by this situation. Blood and tears mixed into one mixture. Suddenly, unexpectedly, someone hit one of the crowd with full force. The next moment, Mark stood and protected the farmer, who, in tears and panic, covered himself with his hands while squatting. It is vile for a crowd to attack one. Moving his hand to the side and looking at the offenders. They began to run away in panic and screamed as they ran. Georgia. It's Mark. Let's run. After making sure that all the offenders had run away, Mark extended his hand to the farmer, who was beaten, and his right eye was already swollen from the beatings. You can get up? Yes. You gave me, who has no parents, a status lower than livestock. The huge mansion stood among the trees, and the path led to the doors. Maurice. Warm house. This farmer turned out to be Maurice, who walked behind Mark and looked at all the objects in the house. Mark turned towards Maurice and spoke. Your miasma is a real talent. Suddenly Mark found clothes for Maurice that were several sizes larger than him. I wouldn't want to lose them. Maurice was shocked by what was said. But Mark continued his sentence. For starters, it would be nice for you to become a sorcerer. Looking at Maurice, Mark said with a serious look. Maurice. Maurice turned to Mark and listened carefully to what Mark would say next. Knowing what you live for. The most important thing in life. Grabbing Maurice's shoulder. Maurice asked in surprise. Is it true? Mark continued further. You must constantly think about what the meaning of your life is. These words brought tears to Maurice's eyes, and he nodded in response. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Maurice dissolved in his own magic of absorption into the skeleton and with an angry face shouted these words, remembering the moments that he had with Mark. Will not forgive. Maurice remembered Mark's crazy smile. All that was left visible of Maurice was his eye and his nose. The rest has already been corroded by magic. Ayu. 5 years later. The girl stood near the horse. And around them stood deserted mountains with destroyed flora and fauna. The girl stood in protective glasses and, looking at this, said everything. Here they are, the land of the world tree. A land covered in the miasma of Maurice, the traitor sorcerer. They take life from everything, even the world tree has dried up. They say that without special training, even saints will not last even 5 minutes here. Black trees and dark fog filled the ground ahead of the girl. The girl took off her glasses and held them in her right hand. There was a hiking backpack on the ground. I wonder what the atmosphere is like there? The horse began to shake, but the girl, going up to the horse and taking it by the face, turned it towards her and began to calm it down. Are you afraid? Everything will be okay. I, a saint of the highest rank, have even gone on expeditions to the spirit world. The horse's eye was filled with a black dilated pupil. Well run. The girl said. The horse began to run away, and the girl waved after the horse and screamed. Thanks for your service. Everything goes according to plan. The order of knighthood did not expose me. The girl took her backpack and spoke. I will definitely find him. The next moment the girl ran at great speed towards the cliff. Suddenly the girl jumped and grabbed the hang glider, which opened in front of her. Hang gliding around beautiful mountains and landscapes. The girl spoke. Holy sword to Lucia. Dark, scary forest. The trees were withered. There was clearly no life on this earth. Corpses and remains lay in the middle of this forest. The girl standing in the middle of this picture was talking to herself. Miasma devours life. And this is what happened in the end. If it weren't for the holy stone, I would also be in danger. The holy stone was sacred on her chest. This miasma is like a huge beast. And now I am in his stomach. Even the world tree withered in such conditions. The girl shone with a white aura and stood out against a background of this gloomy, dark forest. Judging by my information, Maurice gathered his remaining strength and drowned the entire region in a whirlpool of dark gloomy magic. Everyone except the hero Mark died, but the local landscape has survived to this day. The girl continued to walk through the forest and look around. These gloomy trees really make any life that enters this area disappear. Looks like the holy stone won't last long. Although the holy stone shone with a white aura, as an object it still could not stand in this environment and began to crack. Is that why holy knights don't come here? What if Lucia's sword also rotted? It turns out that I was in vain to travel so far. The girl was talking while she was walking and stepped on something. Raising her head up, she saw a huge dark, scary tree. It was a world tree that used to be beautiful and neat. And now it has turned into a terrible scary tree. Touching the tree with her fingers, the girl said. Once upon a time, the faith of many people gathered here, once a huge world tree. Surprisingly, it has shrunk in size. It has dried up completely. I don't feel the power of the gods or signs of life in it. But something suddenly distracted the girl, and she paid attention to something. It was a sword stuck into a tree. The girl was happy because it was the sword that she had been looking for a very long time. Thank God Lucia's sword was not damaged. Taking hold of the sword, she immediately fell to her knees. What is this? Why does the sword take away my strength? Moving away from the sword, the girl sat and thought what was wrong. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a voice appeared in her head. Miasm. The girl got scared and thought, whitening her eyes. Voice? Telepathy? Magical energy began to accumulate around the tree. The girl stood in a tense position. A voice around the tree spoke. It's hard. Cold. However, the girl was not entirely happy with such a greeting from the tree. Cold sweat dripped from her face. She was shocked by what she saw. It turns out that the local miasma has consciousness. They must have retained the remnants of Maurice's consciousness. The girl spread her arms to her sides and looked forward. Ahead of her there were streams of magic around a dark tree. Listen to me, Magician Maurice. I, Saint Lion Baron. Give me the holy sword, Lucia. The girl stood in a defensive position, crossing her arms near her face. A magical whirlwind flew towards her. He understood me and attacked. Looking at the holy stone, the girl thought. Suddenly, the holy stone shattered into pieces. It's rubbish. The holy stone failed. The girl could not withstand such power of magic and fell to her knees from the blow. Don't you dare brush off the walker to the spirit world. The girl put her palm to the ground and said. Anti-magic superpower barrier. Scorpion. A huge scorpion came out of the ground and destroyed everything around. Columns of smoke filled the area. The girl stood in a half-bent position inside the epicenter of events. I received this power during my wanderings on the holy mountain of Benners. If you hit the ground, a powerful protective barrier will appear that can withstand even the attack of the Demon King. Therefore, what is left of Maurice will not be able to penetrate him. The girl put her hand to her head and said. TC. It's true that I won't be able to get out of it myself. The next moment she sat down on the ground and began to communicate with Maurice. Damn. Hey. Are you the one who was once the black magician Maurice Bermond? You understand me? The girl said into the void. You wanted to tell me something, but for some reason our conversation didn't work out. Maybe we can find a way to talk after all? Pressing herself to her feet, the girl continued. Although you don't have a physical body. How to be? Suddenly the girl's gaze suddenly changed to one of surprise, and she came up with something. Opening the bag with her things, she began to look for something. Somewhere here. After a moment, the girl put together a robe from improvised materials that looked like a little knight. Quite good in such and such a situation. She said. Suddenly, the girl bit her finger. Now. Starting to draw a ritual sign from your blood from your finger. You need a summoning seal. Throwing the created knight doll high up. The girl said. Here is a container for you. Black magic flew into the doll, filling everything and everyone around. The girl clenched her hand into a fist and said. So great. The next moment, a field of magic formed around the doll. The girl was very surprised by what was happening in front of her. Her eyes widened. Looking at the doll, which began to stand up. She simply silently watched Maurice, who moved into the doll. The next moment she asked him. How do you like it? Maurice began to turn his head to the sides, getting used to the new vessel. He clenched and unclenched the gloves he had been given. This is your body now. As long as you are behind a barrier, the miasma cannot harm you. Have your sight and touch returned yet? The girl asked. And by moving the air inside your body, you can speak. The girl suggested to her new friend. Now I want you to tell me your name yourself. Have you forgotten human language? Are your memories preserved? The girl approached the small doll. Around them the earth was broken to smithereens. Carefully watching the doll, the girl heard the answer. Hey you. It looks like nothing will work out. After all, he's just a blob of air. He has no brain, so he cannot think. Distressed, the girl thought to herself. Well, okay, since the evil miasma has dissipated, I'll try to get the holy sword. The girl began to move away from the doll. The next moment she approached the sword, which was stuck in the terrible world tree. Which suffered from Maurice's miasma. Then the goal of my journey will be achieved. She said over her shoulder to her new acquaintance. However, a new acquaintance extended his hand using some of his spells. Hey. The girl looked at the doll smilingly and thought. In this state, did he recognize the holy sword? Suddenly the sword flew out of the tree straight towards the doll. The girl was very surprised by this and at first did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, the sword was right in the hand of a new acquaintance, and there was a huge pop of magic around him. Stones flew in different directions due to the power of the spell. What? Did he pull out the sword? The girl was completely shocked by what she saw, because even she could not get the sword. And then the doll she created calmly pulled him out. The doll was holding his sword. Behind a robe, the bones of the corpse were visible, wrapped in this robe in some places. The eyes from under the knight's helmet took on a form. The white eyes that looked from under the helmet directly at the sword spoke. Fabulous. The girl was still in shock from what she saw. Cold sweat began to flow under her right eye. The next moment, two huge horns sprouted from his helmet. His intellectual level increased sharply from contact with the holy sword? But how can this be? The girl paused a little in her conclusions and asked herself a question. Was his consciousness trapped in the sword? A knight who has already incarnated into a human-like form. He stood opposite her. And behind him stood dark, scary trees that had died from miasma. The entire area was filled with fog. The girl exclaimed to her new friend in shock. You. The girl stood opposite him with a surprised look and realized that this was not a joke. The fear of what she saw was visible in her eyes. The girl asked a question. Who are you? A knight with the same cold gaze. Two white circles were visible from under the helmet. Maurice. Maurice Bermond. The next moment, Maurice raised his hand to his helmet. He exuded a terrible aura and a thirst for murder and revenge. I am the one who will kill the hero Mark, said the knight. Although it's clear from his past what he went through with Mark. And then the sharp betrayal, for which he sacrificed his life to kill Mark, turned out to be insufficient. His anger was genuinely real. I'm Maurice Bermond. I'm the one who will kill. Hero Brand. Miasm. Maurice said out loud while looking at the girl. The girl was surprised by this and said. Yes, they cause incurable diseases. Almost all victims die very quickly, but there are people who manage to survive. Tech, who are called black magicians. After this, surprise was visible on Maurice's face. Black magicians can grow a new organ that dispels miasma, and thanks to it they survive. True, they have now become victims of discrimination. Due to the fact that under the influence of miasma, their appearance changed greatly. People mock them and look down on them, they have become the scum of society. But people make mistakes because black magicians. They have an innate gift. Black magicians can transform miasma into magical power and with its help become powerful sorcerers. Anyone who possesses the abilities of black magicians is worthy of endless gratitude. This is what is written in Reflections on Black Magicians. And yes, it was I who once wrote this book. Maurice was surprised by the girl's story and asked, did you happen to teach at Otter University? The girl nodded her head and answered, yes, I'm Lion Baron. It is a great honor for me that such a great sorcerer like you knows about me. Maurice leaned forward in respect and said, there is no one in this world who does not know about you. It's an honor to meet you. Your works have changed the world's opinion of us. I'm glad I was able to read them. Maurice answered, holding out his hand. And you also resurrected me. Thanks to you, Professor Lion. Maurice replied respectfully. The girl shook Maurice's hand and told him, just call me Lion. The next moment, the girl, looking at the knight Maurice, thought to herself. What was previously just an insensitive miasma acquired the knowledge and honor of that same Maurice. Holy Sword Lucia became Maurice's brain. He also said that he was going to kill Mark's hero. If so, then we will most likely be able to become allies. Suddenly, somewhere in the sky, someone was flying on a dragon. Lion and Maurice noticed this, and the girl thought to herself. Same. Dragon Knights? Two people were sitting on a dragon. The man who was in front clearly did not have a kind look. Danger. If the miasma dissipates, he will notice us. Taking Maurice's hand, the girl shouted. These Dragon Knights. Surely from the order subordinate to Mark. The girl said this with fear on her face. The girl began to peek out from behind a huge root, a dark tree. What's there? What's happening? Maurice asked a question. Hurry up and hide in this hole. Nobody should see you. The girl said sharply to Maurice. But Maurice didn't understand what was happening. The next moment, the girl continued to explain the whole situation. Bad people have come here. Surely they are hunting for the holy sword. I will try to deceive them, and you hide there. Maurice did not answer and remained silent, looking at the girl. The next moment, Maurice nodded his head and said. Understood. I obey you. Suddenly, Maurice began to climb into the hole that was in the tree. Lion told him over his shoulder. Thank you. Maurice said further. You can't give them the holy sword. The girl agreed with this. The huge dragon was looking for a place to land. A huge paw stuck into the ground. His claws were very sharp and dangerous. Steam came from the dragon's mouth, his teeth were huge and sharp as reefs. The next moment, the dragon opened its mouth and stood next to a girl and a man in clothing similar to Mark's people. The man began to speak. It's surprising that the miasma has completely dissipated. What happened here? The girl answered, looking at her companion. This must be the work of that pilot flying towards the Valley of the World Tree. The glider of which we saw a long time ago. Even we could not get close to these lands. We need to find him and interrogate him. However, the next moment the man was surprised that someone stood opposite him. Hello. For some reason, the miasma suddenly dissipated. Amazing, right? Lion said. Who are you? Did you come on that glider? A girl from the squad asked a question. Yes. Yes. It wasn't easy. I thought of flying through this ominous valley, but a gust of wind came and I fell into the forest. Lion answered. If so, why are you still alive? It is impossible to survive while in the miasma. A girl from the squad asked a counter question. The man frowned. Suspicious. You're hardly an ordinary little girl. Lion began to scream, her anger visible on her face. Who is this little girl here? I am 59 years old. The man was very surprised by this and said. What? But you don't look 59. Assessing the figure, he answered. Look at this, Santana. There are traces of the use of some kind of protective barrier. The girl squatted down and looked at the seal summoning circle. Reporting the situation to your companion. Can't be. So this barrier eliminated the miasma? Even Mark himself could not cope with them. The man answered sharply. Suddenly, hearing the word Mark from the context of the conversation, Maurice tensed and said it out loud. Mark? In general, I don't know anything. Maybe you can take me to the other side of the valley? They're waiting for me there. Lion said calmly, not counting on anything. Dangerous moment. They must not be allowed to recognize Maurice's presence and that I am a saint. The girl broke out into a cold sweat. Then I won't be able to fool them. Hey, please. The squad did not pay attention to her. Can I ride a dragon with you? I'm even ready to pay with my body. Lion begged and tried to somehow lure these two detectives. But everything is useless. Approaching the tree, the man looked at the slot where the sword was. These marks. Lion continued to scream at the two. Hey. What do you think? Are you not interested in me at all? But the man turned sharply to Lion and asked. Where is the holy sword? Lion was surprised by this question and asked again. Holy sword? And this is the weapon used to fight magicians? I've never even seen anything like this. The next moment, the man pressed his sword to Lion's neck. Lion was frightened by this event. Hirdo, get yours. A man from the squad turned to his girlfriend. Eat. The girl took out her sword and pointed it at Lion. Lion didn't understand what was happening and asked. What are you going to do? A holy sword resonates with another holy sword. While the valley was covered in miasma, the holy sword Lucia located here did not respond to our blades. But now he must answer. Must answer my holy sword and I. And Urim, holy sword of Hirdo. The man and girl swung their swords at each other. The explosion from the contact of the swords was so loud that Lion covered herself from the blow. And what does this strange sound of swords give you? Lion sarcastically asked two people from the squad. They didn't answer Lion and just stood there silently. Suddenly the man said. I can hear him. At this moment, Lion was surprised. Eh? A sound came from the tree. Maurice, sitting in the tree, was in a panic from all this that happened in a few minutes. Lucia. Maurice spoke. He's there. The holy sword of Lucia is there. Three silhouettes stood near a tree and shouted these phrases. Lion looks at the two-man squad of knights with a surprised look. Resonance. I didn't know that holy balls have such a feature. Standing next to the knights, she thought to herself. What to do? Will it be possible to outwit them somehow and escape with Lycia? These two are Santana and Hirdo, really holy knights. 11th and 12th rank. The holy knight of the 12th rank weapon is the holy sword of Ice Urim Hirdo. The holy knight of the 11th rank weapon is the holy sword of Flame and Ice Santana. Lion tensed and continued to think how to solve such a terrible situation. Perhaps a protective barrier will help? No. It won't work. Looking at the sinister dragon on which the knights arrived, she reasoned about the fight. I can't beat them in a 1-on-2 fight. What to do? Looking at the back of the knights who were heading towards the sound of the sword, Lion abruptly came up with something. Precisely. The next moment, Maurice climbed out of the hollow tree with the sword of Lucia in his hand. Suddenly, the knights abruptly stood in a fighting stance, holding their weapons in a fighting pose. A monster? One of the knights exclaimed. Santana, look what's in his hand. The holy sword of Lucia. One of the knights exclaimed, looking at Maurice's sword. Monster, how dare you touch Mr. Mark's sword? The knight girl said. Maurice stood perplexed by this statement. Brand? Who are you anyway? Suddenly Lion abruptly grabs Maurice by the shoulder and starts running away. The knights stood in shock from what they saw. With what speed Lion began to run away from them. Let's run. Lion exclaimed. The next moment, Maurice and Lion jump on the dragon. The dragon was displeased with this. What are you up to? Only we can fly a dragon. The fleeing male knight shouted at the top of his voice to Lion and Maurice. Lion was not at a loss the next moment and, sitting on the dragon, used the addiction technique. However, the dragon was covered with a white aura and exclaimed. Key.uh. The next moment they were already flying away on the dragon, and the knights could only watch what was happening. Damn. The man exclaimed. Sitting on a dragon that was already somewhere in the sky. Maurice asks Lion a question. Mrs. Lion. Do these two have anything to do with Mark? To which Lion responds. They are from the Order of Holy Knights. Orders of fanatical followers of Mark. However, Maurice did not understand what had happened and continued to ask questions. Mrs. Lion. Why did you resist them? Because I can't forgive Mark's hero. Lion said with anger on her face. Her eyes were empty, and she was staring into the void. No. I cannot forgive Mark and his fanatics for the brutal murders they are doing in this country. No way. Remembering various moments, Maurice finally realized what was what and his eyes widened. Howl. An eye. The night girl screams and magical powers fly towards the dragon. The power of fire? The magic of addiction will be destroyed. Lion screams with panic on his face. The next moment, turning back, she notices how Maurice begins to fall from the dragon. Landing on the ground around him, a layer of dust formed. The knight who was standing opposite Maurice immediately told Maurice. Did you think you could run away from us? Getting up from a not very soft landing, Maurice introduced himself. My name is Maurice Bermond. I am the one who will kill Mark's hero. There was pure hatred in his eyes. However, looking at Maurice, the knight stood a little shocked. Maurice Bermond? It can't be. He died in this forest. The man abruptly took his sword in his hand and started walking towards Maurice. No. We don't care if you're Maurice or not. If you want to kill Mr. Mark. Without finishing the sentence, the knight started something. The next moment, after sharply attacking Maurice, he continued. I won't let you stay alive. Maurice stood motionless and watched as a knight flew at him with an attack. However, Maurice parried the knight's attack with just one hand. The man directed all the force into the blow. He gritted his teeth with anger and the force put into the blow. However, Maurice stood with his usual face looking at the knight. With one movement, he throws the knight a few meters away from him, thereby showing how much difference they have in strength. The knight was shocked while flying. In the next moment, the knight did not lose his head and landed on one leg. How strong he is. His magic power is of a completely different level. Lion exclaimed with shock on her face, who was watching the battle event taking place in front of her. However, the next moment, the night girl suddenly appeared from behind Maurice. There were some fragments around her that flew at Maurice. She was ready to deliver the final blow. But Maurice felt it. Ice dance. The night girl cast a spell, directing the shards at Maurice. But Maurice stretched out his arm and absorbed this technique with his sword-free hand, directing the trajectory of the attack directly into the girl's face. The girl, noticing this, understood that she would not shy away and looked at Maurice with a devastated look. Suddenly, a huge ray of magic flew out of Maurice's hand right into the face of this night girl. And now? Her companion shouted. The girl was surprised that a scratch appeared on her face. Falling to her knees, she looked at Maurice far away from her. At this moment, Lion, sitting on a dragon near the battlefield, was thinking to herself. His magic strike is extremely strong. The same as in the battle with the legendary black magician Maurice. However, the knights were standing next to each other and discussing the events that had happened minutes earlier. What nonsense. A power of this level. Is this really the real Maurice? The male knight exclaimed. Surrender. Maurice shouted from afar. But the knights did not understand why he said that. You have already realized how different our forces are. If you surrender, I will spare your life, said Maurice. The male knight replied to Maurice. Do you think we will obey? However, in the next moment, a hole formed near him. Maurice started using some kind of technique collecting magic in his hand. I riot. The next moment, the ground under the knight's feet began to collapse, and all they had to do was. It's only to defend yourself with your hands. Dodging Maurice's attacks, holes formed near the knights from Maurice's magic. Maurice started using another technique called Urdian. At this moment, a huge magic beam of magic was heading towards the knights. And there was a huge explosion. Maurice did not stop there and continued to use spells that exploded near the knights. Columns of smoke instantly rose up. Lion was shocked by what she saw. There was a colossal explosion near the dragon that Lion was sitting on. The knights, looking at this, were all in shock. Turning their heads, they saw a huge crater that had formed due to Maurice's attack. The next moment, Maurice was standing not far from the knights and telling them what had happened to him. The holy sword of Lucia and my death with the world tree. They gave me an incredibly huge power. With her help, I will destroy everything that Mark has created. I will destroy it. I will destroy it. I'll drive him into the very depths of hopelessness, and then I'll kill you. I'll kill you, hero Mark. Maurice stood not far from the knights holding his sword in his hands. The next moment Maurice said, "The holy sword of Lucia, the world tree and 5 years of death. They gave me strength." The knights were recovering from the last attack and getting up. The guy asked, "Erdian, right?" From the sky, sitting on a dragon, Lion watched them. A forbidden technique, which, as they say, was owned by the Demon King himself. Incredible power. The knight guy was standing in front of Maurice, who began to cast a spell. Santana. Put down the Yura. The knight was excited and looked at Maurice with apprehension. While the dragon was flying over Maurice, the knight girl said, "I do not know for what reason it happened, but this Maurice is alive." To which her partner replied, "He has the power not inferior to the Demon King, and he has the holy sword of Lucia." Looking at Lion excitedly watching what was happening and flying on a dragon, he continued, "Besides, there is a mysterious woman behind him. Perhaps this is the plan of the College of Priests." The girl lowered her head, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, and asked her partner, "To solve the problem, we need the power of Yura, don't we? And you're an I too." To which he replied to her, "You do understand, don't you? If we do this now, we will die." Maurice just looked at the knights while they decided what to do. The knights were distraught with the realization that they could die now. Both were drooling from their mouths, and their eyes were on the verge of madness. "It will be top class. Yes. Top class," they said. They began to prepare for battle. "To eliminate the threat to Mr. Mark, we will rush into battle without sparing our own lives." Maurice was only surprised by such devotion and continued to just watch. The knights took out their swords and stood in fighting positions, preparing to rush into battle. "We will remain forever in Mark's heart. Like his heroic followers." Maurice continued to watch them, and after hearing what he said, "It's his divine sword." Lion flying on a dragon covered her face with her hand from the air currents. The knight pointed the sword in front of him and continued to shout, "Exactly. Swords that have become the haunt of the ancient gods. You will be crushed." Maurice stood waiting for the knights to attack. His crying was blown by the wind. He asked, "And how much of the saints' blood was shed to create them?" The knight was incredibly angry and shouted, asking Maurice, "Saints? Are you talking about those assholes drugged by a demon? We no longer need the College of Priests, nor the god Acelia himself. After all, Mark himself will one day become the god of this world." Lion jumped off the dragon at that moment and flew down. Lion landed behind Maurice and was very angry with the knight's words, so she started screaming, "Fuck you. Both Mark and you are just brutal murderers. How easy you are to my comrades." But Maurice did not let her finish, raising his hand in front of her. Looking at the knights and covering the lion with their hand, they listened to what the knights answered. "Woman, you standing behind Maurice, we're going to kill you too soon." Maurice, holding his hand in front of Lion and clenching his fist, replied, "It is clear, it turns out that the list of victims is not limited to one mine. The saints from the College of Priests also suffered." Lowering his hand, Maurice continued, "Ms. Lion, I understand what the situation is." Maurice raised his hand to his helmet, holding the holy sword of Lucia in the other, and said, "I will fight with you against the lying hero Mark. And for starters," stretching out his hand forward, his eyes tanned, Maurice said, "I will give you as a gift the defeat and despair of these two." The knight frowned. Maurice's words made him very angry, and he said, "Don't be impertinent. The divine sword was created to kill demons, but it will also work for you, who have less power. You will not defeat us." Raising their swords to their faces, the knights said with one voice, "We offer our lives to the ancient gods who have found their home here." The girl finished the spell with words, "Devour it with icy cold." Her partner finished with the words, "Devour it with flames." The next moment, they raised their swords and shouted, "Show yourself." At that moment, they pierced themselves with their own swords, and the power of divine swords began to burn around them. The next moment, the guy instantly caught fire, all his clothes burned. Fire replaced his hair, fire also burned from his eyes. At this time, a ring of ice formed around the girl surrounding her. As soon as the circle formed, the ice spikes began to move directly towards the girl. The next moment, ice spikes pierced the girl. She was hanging on the ice, blood sprayed from her mouth. Burning in flames, the guy rose in a new form of speaking. For the hero. For Mark. The girl was trapped in a huge block of ice, and her body was split into pieces. We will sacrifice our bodies and hearts forever. The next moment, a block of ice cracked and a girl appeared in her new form. 8 arms grew out of her head, and she was made of ice. Together with you. The god of ice is Yer. An ice creature with a crown of ice and arms growing out of its head. The god of fire is Anai. The monster looks more like a devil with goat legs, horns and a mouth full of sharp fangs. They were both incredibly huge compared to Maurice and Lion, who were watching everything from the sidelines. Lion was very scared and said, "They have materialized the gods dwelling in their swords." And Maurice raised his sword to join the fight. Erdian. The next moment, there was a huge explosion. The ground was crumbling underfoot, and huge boulders were flying in all directions. The materialized gods managed to put up a magic shield before a huge beam of explosive energy released by Maurice flew into them. The fire god held his hand in front of him, but his shield could not stand, and the energy broke through, hitting him in the shoulder. The gods stood surrounded by a huge flow of magical power. In the next moment, all this energy gathered right under them and a huge explosion formed, destroying everything around. The next moment, when the dust from the explosion dispersed, both gods were standing wounded, and both had no hands. Lion was very excited about the situation and thought. Erdian didn't work. What should Maurice do? The next moment, the gods began to regenerate and their hands began to recover. Maurice understood that the situation was almost hopeless and looking at the gods who had already recovered and were ready to fight with a confident look said, "Well, then I'll show you something. The power of Lucia's demonic sword." Maurice, standing in front of the gods of light and flame and holding the sword of Lucia in his hands, said, "Well, then I'll show you something. The power of Lucia's demonic sword." The ice god closed her eyes and crossed her arms over her chest. A star began to burn in her chest. The next moment, a strong ice spell was directed at Maurice, which left behind a trail of huge blocks of ice. Lion touched the ground with her hands and used the barrier while thinking. Divine power attacks are an order of magnitude higher both in power and in range. We must try not to get hit. The next moment, Maurice was already in the air above the gods, and the ice goddess was already preparing to repeat her spell. Maurice was already ready to attack and was able to dodge the spell right in the air, leaving behind only an afterimage. After which, behind him, the spell exploded, forming a huge block of ice in the air. The next moment, Maurice raised his hand in front of him and began to prepare his spell. A bloody drop began to form in his hand, and he began to cast a spell. Child of the Dawn. More and more blood swirled around him as he prepared the spell. Overthrowing star. Lowering the blade of the sword down and uttering the last words. Winged cherub. A huge magic field began to form behind Maurice. At this moment, the ice god completely covered her body with her hands, protecting herself from the upcoming attack. Raising his sword and taking it aside, Maurice said, "Stop it." The next moment, several magic circles formed in the air, and the magic hit the ice god. The god of ice could not withstand this attack and split in half. At this moment, Maurice was descending to the ground, and behind him the fire god was preparing to attack him. From the impact, Maurice flew into the ground and crashed with such force that the ground cracked at the place of his landing. Lying in the ground, Maurice looked at the fire god, who was shouting and preparing for another attack. The next moment, the fire god formed a magic sphere at his mouth and began to breathe fire like a dragon. The stream of fire struck directly at Maurice. The next moment, a huge explosion sounded, destroying everything in its path. Lion barely held the barrier so as not to get hurt. And the god of fire watched the place of impact hovering in the air. The next moment, the ice god had already fully recovered and was ready to attack. The fire god landed next to her, and they both stood ready to continue the battle. Lion dispelled the barrier and anxiously watched what was happening while speaking. Like a sea of fire. Maurice, he seems to have hit the epicenter of the blow. The next moment, the smoke from the fire god's blow dissipated, and the silhouette of Maurice became visible, which surprised Lion very much. Maurice was coming out of a flaming cloud of dust asking. Taking up his sword and standing in a fighting pose, Maurice said. Compared to the soul-burning hellfire, it was just a cool breeze. Well, that's enough. It's time to finish with you. Maurice held his sword, which was bleeding, and said, "Demonic sword of Lucia. Reveal the darkness of the abyss." In the next moment, blood filled the entire space. The gods did not understand what was happening, and Maurice continued to ask the demonic sword Lucia to give him strength. In the next moment, both gods were attacked with blood, and their incarnations were scattered, leaving behind only the bodies of knights with their own swords pierced through their bodies. Soon the knights fell to the ground, both had blood flowing from their mouths from wounds. They did not understand what had happened and how Maurice had defeated the incarnations of the gods. Lion was very much surprised and looked at the knights and Maurice, who stood in front of them leaning on his sword. Lion was thinking, what happened? The next moment, Maurice walked up to the knights who were screaming in agony and said, "The sword of Lucius overthrew the gods who dwelt in their swords. You are no longer holy knights." The knights' eyes had turned black, and there were no longer any glints of light or pupils visible in them. They got down on one knee in front of Maurice, and the swords continued to stick out of their bodies. Maurice said, "I think I'll call you the Black Knights from now on." Lion, standing behind Maurice and seeing all this, was at a loss. She asked Maurice, "What happened to them?" The knights stood in front of Maurice, who ordered them, "You too, pull out your swords." The Black Knights took up their swords and pulled them out of their bodies. Blood gushed out of their bodies. The next moment, both of them were standing in front of Maurice, holding swords in their hands, waiting for the next order. Blood was pouring from their bodies, and their eyes were black. Lion was greatly surprised by the situation and looked at Maurice with surprise, who explained to her, "They have bound themselves by oaths with the overthrown gods, so now they will not be able to die so easily. Until I kill Mark." Lion didn't quite understand Maurice's explanation and asked, "What does it mean?" Maurice said they weren't just his puppets. They will find a way to kill Mark on their own, and they will put their plan into action themselves. Lion was frightened by the power of Maurice and the demonic sword of Lucia and realized that Maurice has terrible power. She looked at Maurice, who was standing next to his sword, and thought, was the resurrection of Maurice the right thing to do? He seems to be even more dangerous than Mark. No. Now we all need this crushing force. The next moment, Maurice took the sword out of the ground and took it in his hand, and Lion continued. His body took shape only thanks to my barrier magic. And I can turn him back into a disembodied spirit at any moment. This will be a kind of fuse. But surely he himself has already realized this. Lion held out her hand and smiled, saying, "Maurice, I want to borrow your power." Maurice pressed it to his chest and took his hand away, explaining, "Mrs. Lion, I spent 5 years in the form of miasma, and I don't know what happened during that time. Did Mark defeat the Demon King?" Lion shook her head in a negative gesture and looking at Maurice said, "Mark got his hands on a powerful force called the Order of Holy Knights. However, the Demon King is still alive." After these words, Maurice's eyes lit up. Lion continued to explain the events that had happened while Maurice was a miasma. 3 years ago, Mark, with the help of the Holy Knights, forcibly returned the lands of Rance. At the moment, Mark is on the territory of the Rance. And he is preparing for the final battle with the Demon King who lives in Gillis. Such things? Maurice asked. And what about the people of Gillis? Lion, presenting a picture of how demons bully people, told that they have all become the playthings of demons. Demons exist only to cause people suffering. They keep the inhabitants of Gillis alive just for this. Maurice was beside himself with anger and asked, "Why didn't Mark destroy the Demon King? Surely he has more power than 5 years ago." Lion looked at Maurice with a confident look and said, "Maurice, you know the answer yourself." To which Maurice replied, "Heroes exist to destroy the Demon King. By eliminating the Demon King, will he eliminate his own value? But neither the monarch nor the College of Priests will agree with such arguments. And most importantly, the people." Lion continued and said, "He gets away with everything. And Mark takes advantage of this and builds up his own strength. One day Mark will destroy the Demon King. But this will happen only after he has raked in the whole country. The kingdom of Eteria Rance. The city stood in front of the mountains. Almost every house had a chimney from which smoke soared. The trading city of Peria, the training camp of the Order of Holy Knights. Inside the fortress there was a parade of knights. They walked in straight rows, and people rejoiced and rejoiced. The Order of the Holy Knights. The total number of 112 people. 12 of them have the title of Divine Knights and form the elite of the order. Among them were those knights whom Maurice defeated. The knights went out to the people on the gallows in front of the people. Each of them had scars, and it was clear that each of them was an experienced warrior, which is why they are in the elite of the Holy Knights. Then one of the Divine Knights, pointing with his hand at the people crucified on the crosses, exclaimed. "The people of Peria. We are an order of Holy Knights, we have caught some heretics. Here. They are. James Johansson, a priest from the Rubel district. His wife Eva, and his daughter Evelyn. These people stole our donations that were supposed to go to fight the Demon King." Priest James Johansson interrupted the Divine Knight and said. "This is some kind of mistake. I didn't do anything like that." The Divine Knight said. "A man who was supposed to serve God says such words. That's what kind of people there are in the College of Priests. Do you think that the college can act on behalf of our goddess Celia?" People were furious, everyone was angry at the priest and shouted. "No. We need to disperse the College of Priests." The priest was greatly surprised by the anger on the part of people and only looked perplexed. Then a stone flew into his head, which was thrown by a little boy who was screaming. "Dirty saints, you are driven by Satan. Which of you are saints?" The next moment, people started throwing stones at the priest and his family, and the Divine Knight was cheering and shouting. "You spies of the Demon King. Enemies of the hero. The writing priest of Lita de Pantani has lost his power due to age. And his cardinals abandoned their obligations and fled to other countries." The priest did not understand why he was falsely accused of theft, why his family was here, and why the Divine Knights and the Order of Holy Knights were trying to slander the College of Priests, while the Divine Knight himself continued. "The College of Priests no longer has the right to call themselves representatives of the goddess Celia. And if so, someone has to take on their responsibilities." People were screaming. "The Order of the Holy Knights. The Order of the Holy Knights. And who should lead everyone?" People were all shouting together. "Macr. Mark. Mark. Mark." The next moment he went upstairs and smiled because his plan had succeeded. Van Lion stood opposite Maurice, extending her hand to him and saying that Mark had received into his hands a powerful force called the Order of Holy Knights. However, the Demon King is still alive. Maurice still only listened carefully to what Lion was telling him. Lion said with a little sadness in her eyes. 3 years ago, Mark, with the help of the Holy Knights, returned the lands of Rance by force. Currently, Mark is in Rance territory. He prepares for the final battle with the Demon King who lives in Gillis. So it goes. Maurice was surprised and could only ask. "What about the people of Gillis?" Lion frowned and said with dissatisfaction. "They all became toys of demons. Demons tormented people, mocking them in every possible way, hanging them on the walls, and simply tearing them apart. Demons exist only to cause suffering to people. They saved the lives of the inhabitants of Gillis only for this." Maurice was too angry and it was felt through the knight's helmet, his eyes burned with anger. Why didn't Mark destroy the Demon King? Surely he has more power than he did 5 years ago. Maurice. You know the answer yourself. Lion answered. Heroes exist to destroy the Demon King. By eliminating the Demon King, will Mark lose his own value? Maurice spread his hands and asked. But neither is the monarch. Neither the College of Priests will agree with such arguments. And most importantly, the people. Lion herself was saddened by what she was saying, but she continued anyway. He gets away with everything. And Mark takes advantage of this and builds up his own strength. Rave. Maurice answered. One day, Mark will destroy the Demon King, but this will happen only after he takes over the entire country. Kingdom of Etheria Rance. Trade city of Peria, training camp of the Order of Holy Knights. Knights march across the square in even rows, and people greet them with joy. The total number of Odin of Holy Knights is 112 people. 12 of them have the rank of Divine Knights and form the elite of the order. A Divine Knight named Abel, accompanied by several others, entered the square with the crucified people, and the people cheered him. Abel addressed the people. People of Peria. We are an order of Holy Knights. Several heretics have been caught. Here they are. He pointed to people tied to crosses in the square. James Johansson, a priest from the Rubel area. His wife Eva. And also his daughter Evelyn. These people pocketed our donations that were supposed to go towards fighting the Demon King. James didn't understand why he was being accused. It's some kind of mistake. Me. I didn't do anything like that. Abel was angry, anger was visible in his eyes. A man who was supposed to serve God says such words. These are the kind of people there are in the College of Priests. Do you think that the board can speak on behalf of our goddess Celia? The people were furious and shouted that the College of Priests should be dispersed. James only looked in surprise at the crowd of people who were aggressively opposed to him and his family. Then a stone flew into his head. It turned out that he was thrown by a young guy who was screaming, "Dirty saints. You are driven by Satan. Which saints are you? You are spies of the Demon King. The hero's enemies." People did not calm down, throwing stones at James and his seven. Abel continued to provoke the crowd. The high priest Leda de Pantani has lost his power due to age. And his cardinals abandoned their obligations and fled to other countries. While Abel continued, the College of Priests no longer has the right to call themselves representatives of the goddess Celia. James was completely depressed. In his gaze one could easily read his innocence in what was happening. If so, someone must take over their responsibilities. Abel shouted. People chanted only one thing. Order of Holy Knights. And who should lead them? Abel asked. Mark. Hero Mark. People shouted enthusiastically. At that moment, smiling, Mark walked out onto the square. Everything went according to his plan. People took his side. Standing in front of a crowd of people, Mark began to speak. We. Order of Holy Knights. Let's fight the Demon King even more fiercely. Perhaps many Holy Knights will perish. Perhaps this will cause even more pain to you, ordinary citizens. Surely there will be traitors. But we can handle it. We will definitely defeat the Demon King. We will save this world. Mark spread his hands and said. This is exactly the meaning of my life. People who heard Mark's speech began to cry and shout joyfully. Mark took out his sword and raised it up. His gaze was directed into the distance. Then the sword began to shine and illuminate the entire area. People stared in amazement. Many could not hold back their tears, others from surprise. It was the holy sword of Elis. The dazzling light of the holy sword Elis in the hands of the hero Mark. Meanwhile, Lion continued to tell Maurice about Mark and his plans. Mark is trying to subjugate the College of Priests. His main goal is the post of High Priest. Maurice could only listen. With every word his gaze became darker. High Priest, representative of the goddess Celia on earth. His power is comparable to the power of the king himself. Now the board no longer has such power. Mark completely undermined the authority of the church. Now all the priests are under arrest. Maurice was incredibly surprised. What about the kingdom? The king had to do something. Why didn't he stop the hero's outrages? To which Lion replied. Our king is an ardent fan of Mark. By the way, he also took advantage of the hero's popularity to get his post. This is how things are in the kingdom. The whole country supports Mark. And he wants to move from the caste of heroes to the high priests. Not even. He wants to become God himself. And also, in the knightly order serving Mark. There are several divine sword wielders who are capable of defeating the Demon King. Now after you've dealt with 2 of them. There are 10 of them left. But you still want to continue your fight with Mark? Lion asked. Maurice was incredibly angry. Darkness began to emerge from his body, taking the form of hands at the end. These hands began to absorb the Knights of Darkness standing not far from Maurice. After he completely absorbed them, Lion asked him. What did you do? To which Maurice replied. The bodies of these 2 were eaten away by the miasma and became close to entering the ethereal state. So I was able to move them inside my body. I decided to try to see if it would work. Touching his chest, Maurice said. An amazing phenomenon. I feel the beating of a non-existent heart. The more Mark has achieved in these 5 years, the more powerful his powers became. The louder my heart beats in my chest. Because I am. One after another. I'll take everything he has. Completely engulfed in darkness and miasma, Maurice said. Lion said smiling. Maurice. I want to introduce you to some people. They will be the key to our revenge. Having mounted the dragon and soared into the sky, they set off. Flying over the mountains and the plain, which was shrouded in fog. Maurice said. What a backwater. What kind of place is it? Then Maurice noticed something and began to shake his head, hoping to notice what it was. Barrier? He asked. It was Lion who answered. Pointing to the birds flying nearby, she said. Even wild animals won't suspect anything. Having landed at the building in the middle of the forest clearing, Lion said that they had finally arrived at the place. When Maurice descended from the dragon and saw the building, he was surprised. This? But he didn't have time to ask because Lion interrupted him and answered. Right. Welcome to my secret home. Maurice Bermond. Looking around the building and surroundings, Maurice could only say one thing. Great. The house is protected by a multi-layer barrier. Even the most advanced magicians would not be able to detect it. Reaching out into the void in front of her, she dissipated and created a hole in the air. Lion said this is a necessary measure. It's different. The Order of Holy Knights will find me immediately. Lion said, finally opening the entrance. To which Maurice just nodded and said, it's clear. Walking inside, Lion invited Maurice to enter. After which the entrance immediately closed and disappeared. Walking inside, Maurice saw a cute little garden with flowers and several people exercising. Seeing how hard they were training, Lion looked at them and said, they seem to be working diligently. Maurice was interested in who it was. At this time, a plump guy and a girl ran to a basket of sweets. The guy was behind the girl and shouted that the sweets would belong to him. Meanwhile, another couple was fighting. The guy attacked the girl and said that today he would definitely win. The girl just jumped back and prepared for the blow. Having said, well, I'm not sure. At this moment, Maurice, watching from the side, was incredibly surprised. This simply cannot be. After all, the girl hit the ground, which left a rather large area in which the ground cracked. The next moment, lightning began to emerge from the ground and headed straight towards the guy, causing him to fall to the ground, losing his balance. Maurice and Lion watched from the side. Lion asked Maurice, surprised? To which Maurice simply replied, yes. Are they sorcerers? Or saints? Lion answered, they are not sorcerers. Neither the saints. These are the monks from the holy mountain of Benners. Mount Benners. Maurice exclaimed. Rumor has it that it is located far to the east. And that there live those whom the people of Eteria call heretics. Right. Lion answered. And yet, they, like us, do not distinguish between the power of magicians and the power of saints. They call their power chakra. Chakra? Maurice asked. To which Lion replied. It seems that you, the great sorcerer Bermond, are seeing them in battle for the first time. But I think you'll soon see something even more amazing. At this time, the girl who was fighting with the guy took a fighting stance and prepared to strike. But at that moment the guy appeared behind her and, standing on his hands, began to kick, from which the girl only defended herself by saying that the guy was not bad. The next moment, the girl found the right moment and grabbed the guy by the leg and threw him away, which surprised Maurice. The guy and the girl stood opposite each other in fighting poses, and both were ready to continue the battle. The next moment the guy's fist was in the girl's face, which greatly surprised her. But at the moment of the blow, she was able to dodge, and they continued to exchange blows. The next moment, the girl hit the guy in the legs, causing him to fall, but he was able to lean on his hand and maintain his balance. Maurice and Lion discussed their fight. It's clear. With the help of chakras. Are they enhancing their physical and mental abilities? Maurice asked. The guy and the girl looked at each other and then the guy said. Crap. No matter how much I evade, she knows all my steps in advance. To which the girl pointed to her eye and said. Sorry. To me, you are standing still. This made the guy very angry. Thick energy began to accumulate around him and he said. Then maybe I'll hit it once from all directions at once? Maurice looked at the guy who was rushing to attack and said. Given his lack of source of magical power, this is a powerful move. The next moment, at least 100 blows were flying at the girl from all sides. It disoriented her, and she didn't understand how to fight it off. But the next moment she used sensitivity enhancement, and at the same moment she found herself right in front of the guy. Her fist was already right in front of his face, but she stopped a moment before touching. The guy lost his balance and fell, saying sadly. Defeat. The girl laughed and smiled and went to the basket of sweets. Well, then all the sweets are mine. When she was already enjoying the lollipop, the guy said. Crap. But next time I will definitely win. The rest of the monks only supported him, and one of them said that the battle was very cool. In this moment, Maurice understood. They really are not like sorcerers and saints. Monks, that is. To which Lion simply agreed. You mages draw strength from darkness. And we, saints, are from the light. But these guys are not like the rest of us. Monks draw strength for battle from themselves. Turning her gaze to Maurice, Lion said. This force is called chakra. Maurice said he understood everything. And Lion leaned towards him and asked. So how? Interesting? You won't find guys like that in the kingdom. Maurice thought for a moment and answered. Yes. Noya, too, once. I was thinking about something similar. Then the girl who won the fight for sweets saw Lion, and Teacher Lion joyfully ran towards her, shouting. She ran up to her and, without stopping, jumped to Lion and hugged her. Lion greeted her, calling her Cynthia. Cynthia raised her head and looked at Lion. She was worried, and you could see how much she was worried about Lion, she said. God bless. And I was afraid, what will happen if you don't come back? Then she noticed Maurice standing behind Lion and looked out of her arms with interest. Approaching him and tugging at his horns, Cynthia asked. And what's that? New golem? Lion did not expect this from Cynthia and was a little alarmed. Maurice tried to answer who he was. No, I am. But Cynthia interrupted him by shouting. He says. Cynthia liked Maurice, she was happy to see what she thought was a new golem. What is this? So great. Oh, what else can you say? Cynthia continued to hold Maurice by the horns. Handing him the candy, she asked. Do you want some candy? Yes, do you eat it all? Maurice tried to stop her. Hey, wait. But everything was useless. The next moment, Maurice didn't have time to finish speaking because Cynthia had already shoved the candy into his eye. But when she pulled it out, she noticed that there was no candy and was surprised. Have you eaten? Rejoicing even more, she said, that means you are not a golem. Then who? So cute. Maurice was at a loss. Am I cute? But he didn't have time to think about anything else as Cynthia began to spin him, holding him by the horn and asking him. Do you have a name? If not, can I come up with one? At this point, Lion tried to stop her, running towards her with her arms outstretched in an attempt to force Maurice to the ground. Wait. Stop it, Cynthia. At that moment, Cynthia came up with a name. Exactly. Kuro. You're all black, so you'll be Kuro. Finally, Cynthia set Maurice down. He felt dizzy, but he heard the name. Kuro? At that moment, he noticed a mark on Cynthia's neck. It was 3 rectangles forming a triangle. This mark is the same as Lena's. Means. You. Priestess of the Demon King? And Maurice repeated his question. Priestess of the Demon King? To which Lion replied. Yes. Once upon a time she was. You know that the priestesses of the Demon King were originally called priestesses of Acelia? These strong girls were raised to serve in the palace of the god Acelia. Yes. Lion answered. But 30 years ago, the Demon King showed up in Pilis. And their purpose has changed. They became gifts given to him. They became simply bargaining chips in negotiations between the kingdom and the Demon King. 4 years ago they were presented as a gift, and for about a year they served the Demon King and other monsters. Cynthia said. The Demon King was only kind to us. He was happy when we pet him in different places. Maurice covered his face with his hand and could not answer. And Lion asked Cynthia to stop. Cynthia hugged Lion and asked. But why? After all, it was the Order of Holy Knights that killed us. After all the other priestesses and surviving saints were killed by the Holy Knights. Maurice couldn't believe it. This simply cannot be. But Lion said. Yes. When Mark captured Lance, Cynthia, like many other saints, was freed. But Mark made former captives. Now with their victims. Maurice's gaze at that moment became menacing. At that moment, the rest of the monks ran up to Lion to meet her. Welcome back, teacher. They were all surprised when they saw Maurice. What is this? Golem? I feel the miasma. It's probably a monster. Is this an artificial person with a core of miasma? Lion answered. Yes. You're right. But inside the shell there is someone incredible. Which surprised the guys even more. This is the same great sorcerer. Maurice Bermond. All Lion's students were surprised. Maurice? I think I've heard this name before. Who was it? Here one guy became more cautious, hostility was visible in his gaze. I remembered. He's a black magician. Mark's right hand. They were all ready to attack Maurice, but Lion stood in front of him, blocking him with herself. Stop. You forgot? Maurice is known for betraying Mark. That is, he is his enemy. Which means he is our ally. The guys calmed down and understood everything. At this point, Lion continued and said. And now. Maurice will become our comrade. Together with him we will overthrow Mark. Maurice bowed, introduced himself and greeted everyone. Maurice. Nice to meet you. Lion asked everyone to introduce themselves. The fair guy with disheveled hair was called Kugo. A tall guy with braided hair, Jogo. And the little chubby guy Ahaka. Cynthia came close to Maurice and extended her hand, which he shook. Cynthia. Let's get acquainted, Kuro. The next moment, Lion said to the students. We have some other things to discuss, but you can get back to your training. Lion sat down at the table and asked Maurice. So how? What can you say about these children? I feel that there is a powerful force within everyone. Maurice answered. Especially that girl. And Cynthia. But why should the priestess of the Demon King become a nun? Lion answered. Monk, this is just one of the stages. I hope that I can find a new hero among them who can become a real hero replacing Mark. At that time. White Sorceress Mark, Leona Silyavi and Black Sorceress Mark, Theseus Mondo. We were in the city. They stood next to Mark, who was sitting on the throne. At this moment, a rank 4 Holy Sword Knight walked in. Abel. Who is responsible for public relations. Mark greeted him and asked. What's wrong? Your face is darker than usual. And the heart beats faster. Mark said, looking straight at Abel. Santana and Hirdo. Killed. Abel answered. Mark was surprised by this news, but it no longer surprised him, but angered him. His gaze became heavy and angry. What? He asked. Santana and Hirdo killed? Tell us in detail. Mark said. Abel began to talk. I collected evidence from nearby eyewitnesses. The miasma in that forest suddenly disappeared. Immediately after this, they engaged in battle with the dark monster. The monster, using the holy sword Lucia, made their gods appear and defeated both of them. The dark monster seemed to be using extremely powerful magic. It swallowed them both up. Theseus Mondo said. Impossible. They were both one of the 12 divine sword knights who were capable of defeating even the Demon King. Are you saying that that monster was stronger than the Demon King? Abel replied. There is also some woman who acts in concert with the dark monster. And at the scene of the incident there were traces of a high-level barrier. Leona Silyavi asked. Suddenly this. But I didn't get around to telling my guesses, as Abel said. Yes. Surely it was Lion Baron. Theseus Mondo was angry and said. She constantly causes trouble for Mr. Mark. Leona Silyavi asked. Strange. Why was the monster able to take advantage of Lucia? The holy sword can only be wielded by those who have entered into a contract with it. At this point, Mark answered their questions. Maurice Bermond. Before his death, he forced Lucia to appear. He probably managed to rewrite my contract with Lucia. Mark explained. Theseus asked. But this traitor should be dead? To which Mark replied. He didn't die, no. He was reborn with the help of that same lion. Mark's eyes filled with anger. Maurice. He is quite capable of this. Mark stood up from his throne and announced. Abel. A crisis has arrived for the first time since the creation of the Order of the Knights of the Holy Sword. Immediately declare a state of emergency. Theseus, Leona, go and inspect the scene. Perhaps Lion was hiding somewhere nearby. The next moment, all three left the hall to carry out Mark's instructions. And Mark, left alone, extended his hand to his chest and then to his sword. Mine. He thought. What do you think the resurrected Maurice is up to? Does he want my life? Or you? At this time, Maurice and Lion were sitting at a table with a basket of sweets and watching the monks training. Maurice asked. Do you want to raise a new hero? To which Lion responded. Yes. Will you help me? To which Maurice asked. Our goal is to overthrow Mark and the Order of Holy Knights. Doesn't your proposal contradict her? Contradictory? Lion asked. The Order of Holy Knights has a clear hierarchy. Holy Knights, Divine Knights and Mark himself. The title of hero is given to the one who stands at the head of all the Holy Knights. Therefore, in order to raise your own hero, you need to. But Lion interrupted him and said. You're wrong. The original meaning of the hero. The one who will defeat the Demon King. And the title of hero itself is actually given by the High Priest. And what did Mark do with the High Priest? He was imprisoned so that he could no longer object. Otherwise, he would have long ago deprived Mark of the title of hero. Maurice said clearly. Lion, meanwhile, continued. Moreover, the Demon King is still alive. No matter how you look at it, you need to defeat him. And if so, we must defeat the Demon King, like real heroes, return to the kingdom and triumph. And free the Lord High Priest. Well, we'll deal with Mark later. Maurice began to understand Lion's plan. Indeed, it is better not to try to defeat Mark now. It would be more effective to kill him, depriving him of the title of hero. Right. Lion answered. But all this, of course, is impossible without your help. With your crushing power, we can defeat even the Demon King. It depends on how you look. Maurice answered, not confident in his abilities. My strength is the same as that of the Demon King. He can be defeated, but he will remain in this world as a miasma and will probably be reborn soon. Just like me. In other words, to defeat him, you will need the strength of these children, and yours too. The power of light. I understand. Lion answered. That's why I ask you to help prepare them. Besides. After all, he raised Mark. Exactly you? Right? At this moment, the monks approached, who had already finished their training. Hey. Have you already finished the conversation? Yeah. Lion answered. He agreed to become your personal trainer. Kugo was happy about this news. How interesting. We will try our best, Coach Maurice. Maurice decided to ask Lion. I'll ask just in case. Since I agreed, can I train them as I see fit? To which Lion replied. Certainly. Drive them hard. They're all wrong. Who breaks easily? Lion said with confidence. Maurice stood opposite the guys and asked. The hero's path is harsh and difficult. Are you ready to take this path? Yes, Coach Maurice. They answered. Maurice continued. The hero's main weapon is courage. Are you able to bravely face any enemy? Yes, Coach Maurice, they answered. Meanwhile, Lion was thinking. Great attitude, Maurice. And the next moment, Maurice released the two consumed Dark Knights from the miasma. If so. First, fight them and show them what you are capable of. From this day forward, they will be your opponents. At this moment, both Dark Knights bowed. With great joy, Mr. Maurice. Said the Black Knight Santana. Former level 11 Holy Knight. Your call is a great honor for us. Supreme bliss. The Black Knight Hirdo answered. Former rank 12 Holy Knight. Maurice looked at them and decided to ask. How do you feel about being in the Black Miasma? Santana raised his hands and head up as he spoke. As good as it gets. Mr. Maurice, having entered their world, I felt peace for the first time since I was still in my mother's womb. Hirdo blushed and covered her face with her hands as she spoke. And I felt like I was in a pleasant whirlpool. I felt your miasma with my whole body and many times. Maurice looked at them and said. Looks like you two are quite used to them by now. Yes. They answered. At that moment, Lion walked up to them and said. They became very attached to you. But isn't it dangerous to leave Mark's henchmen free? Lion asked. At that moment, Santana's eyes filled with darkness and he began to scream. Minions? Don't you dare remind me of that. That we once served him. Lion was very surprised by such a reaction to her words. At that moment, Hirdo came up to him and put her hand on his chin and said. Well done, Santana. She leaned against him, they both talked about the same thing. It is because of our shameful past that we look forward to tormenting this person. At this moment, Maurice decided to explain what was happening and said. They shared my raison d'etre. Murder of hero Mark. And therefore they will never betray me. Turning to the Black Knights, Maurice said. I want you to fight these guys. Maurice ordered them to fight at 30% strength and both Black Knights said. Will be done. Hearing that Maurice set the limit to 30%, Kugo said. Wait a minute. THIRTY%? Coach, don't you value us at all? The rest of the guys also supported him. Yes, they are also without weapons. We will definitely be stronger. Right. What kind of knight fights without a sword? Only Cynthia stood silently and watched the knights. Maurice turned to Cynthia. Cynthia, what do you think? Cynthia saw the aura surrounding them and said. Let's see. Our enemies are very strong. They have very hardened bodies and are also strengthened by protective magic. Maurice was glad that Cynthia noticed all this. And you are very observant. He said. So, I try first. Cynthia said as she walked out to the Black Knights. Hey. Not fair. Kugo said. To which Cynthia replied. Today I defeated you all, right? At this time, Hirdo said. I'll go, Santana. Girl versus girl. Hirdo came close to Cynthia and put her hand to her face and asked. Let's talk in body language? Don't be afraid, I will be very gentle. At this moment, Cynthia jumped away from her and carefully watching Hirdo asked. Coach Maurice. Can we start? To which Maurice waved his hand in an approving gesture. Screaming. Let's start. Both girls began to move closer to each other. Both were ready to strike. The next moment, when they were close to each other, they both hit and dodged the blows. As they fought, moving quickly across the battlefield, Cynthia thought that Hirdo was quite fast. But she couldn't reach it, and at that moment she was able to hit Hirdo, so that she flew several meters away. Hirdo said confidently standing on her feet. And you're okay. The watching Santana said. There was no need to limit it to 30%. The next moment, Maurice finally appreciated the fight and began clapping his hands. Perfect. Next time she will fight with full strength. A sweaty Cynthia looked at Maurice and said. She seemed to be fighting at full strength even now. To which Maurice extended his hand towards Hirdo and said, "I determine their combat strength." At that moment, Hirdo was once again consumed by the arms made of miasma. The next moment something came out of the closed hands. Lion turned to Maurice. "Hey Maurice. What it is? I look like a monster." To which Maurice explained. "Yes. You want to make your subordinates brave, right? If so, their opponents in battle should not be people. And the monsters." At this moment, the divine form of Hirdo stood in front of them. A huge monster made of miasma and ice.